Welcome, dear listeners, to a tale that will chill your very soul. A story torn from the annals of history, where the line between the living and the dead blurs into obscurity. Our journey begins on the isolated isle of Poveglia, a forsaken speck in the Venetian lagoon, where the echoes of tormented cries seem to linger in the salty air. Long ago, this island played host to an asylum, a place where the forgotten were condemned to suffer unimaginable horrors behind its crumbling walls. As the veil of night descends, the shadows seem to take on a life of their own, writhing and contorting in the pale moonlight. It is in these haunting hours that the restless souls of Poveglia's damned roam freely, seeking redemption for the atrocities committed against them. Even now, their anguished wails carry across the waters, a chilling serenade that beckons the unwary. But beware, for those who venture too deeply into this realm of shadows may find themselves forever ensnared in the asylum's nightmarish embrace. So steel your nerves, dear listeners, for the tale you are about to hear will shake the very foundations of your beliefs. A story that will force you to question the boundaries between this world and the next, and to confront the darkest depths of human depravity. The forgotten asylum of Poveglia waits, and its secrets are not for the faint of heart. The peristyle. Nestled within the tranquil waters of the Venetian lagoon lies an island shrouded in a veil of dread and despair. Poveglia, a mere speck upon the map, casts a sinister shadow that belies its diminutive size. For within its confines lurks a darkness that has seeped into the very fabric of the place. From the moment one sets foot upon its shores, a palpable sense of unease descends like a suffocating miasma. The air itself seems to carry whispers of anguish, echoes of tormented souls that linger long after their physical forms have turned to dust. Poveglia's grim history can be traced back centuries, to the time when the Black Death swept through Venice like a scythe through wheat. In a desperate bid to stem the tide of the plague, the island became a makeshift quarantine zone, its shores littered with the bloated corpses of those condemned to perish in isolation. But even after the scourge had lifted, Poveglia's role as a place of confinement persisted. In the late 18th century, the island was transformed into an asylum, a grim repository for the afflicted and the unwanted, sequestered from the prying eyes of a society that feared and reviled them. Within those oppressive walls, the most depraved forms of treatment were inflicted upon the hapless inmates. Barbaric procedures, born of ignorance and fear, stripped away the very humanity of those already tortured souls. Screams of agony echoed through the dank corridors, as the callous staff subjected their charges to unspeakable cruelties. Tales of sadistic doctors and crude lobotomies abound, their echoes lingering like a poisonous vapor upon the island's accursed shores. And though the asylum has lawns inscrambled into ruin, the cries of the forsaken seem to reverberate through time itself, a haunting chorus that chills the blood and stirs the soul with primal dread. It is amid these grim surroundings that our tale unfolds, a narrative woven from the threads of anguish and despair, where the veil between this world and the next grows perilously thin. For the restless spirits of Poveglia stand yearn to make their stories known, and the reckoning they dim and may prove too terrible to comprehend. Descent into madness. Our tale begins on a crisp autumn evening, as the waning sun casts its golden rays across the rippling waters of the Venetian lagoon. Amid the gentle lapping of waves against the hull of a small boat, a solitary figure cuts through the tranquil expanse, drawn inexorably toward the haunted shores of Poveglia. Jacob Andrews, a young writer in search of inspiration for his latest work, had heard the whispered tales of the accursed island's dark legacy, stories of unspeakable horrors perpetrated within the crumbling walls of its abandoned asylum, had piqued his morbid curiosity, beckoning him to unravel the threads of anguish that seemed to cling to the very air. As the boat drew near, the oppressive atmosphere of the place seemed to descend upon him like a shroud. A sense of dread, palpable and visceral, wormed its way into the core of his being, sending tendrils of apprehension slithering down his spine. Despite the mounting trepidation, Jacob found himself inexorably drawn to the island's forbidding shores. Each step upon the weathered stone sent tremors through the soles of his feet, as if the very earth itself recoiled from his presence. The asylum loomed before him, a crumbling monolith of decay and despair. Its once imposing facade was now little more than a cracked and pitted visage, the ravages of time and neglect touched into every crumbling brick. Jacob's footfalls echoed hollowly through the desolate corridors, stirring up eddies of dust that swirled in the fading light like ghostly apparitions. The air was thick with the musty tang of decay, intermingled with a subtle undertone of something far more sinister, a foul miasma that seemed to cling to the back of his throat with each rattling breath. As he delved deeper into the asylum's bowels, the shadows seemed to take on a malevolent aspect, writhing and contorting in the periphery of his vision. Whispers, faint and indistinct, skittered along the edges of his consciousness, like the fevered mutterings of madmen lost to the depths of their own tormented psyches. Yet, even as dread coiled icy tendrils around his heart, Jacob pressed onward, driven by an inexplicable compulsion to unravel the secrets that this place had fought so fiercely to conceal. For in that moment, he could not have fathomed the true horrors that awaited him within the asylum's accursed depths. Horrors that would shatter the boundaries of his perception and cast him into a realm of nightmares from which there could be no escape. Echoes of cruelty. Driven by an insatiable hunger to unravel the asylum's dark secrets, Jacob delved deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the crumbling edifice. Each step carried him further into a realm where the boundaries between reality and madness blurred, casting him adrift in a waking nightmare from which there seemed no escape. Amid the oppressive gloom, he chanced upon a repository of weathered tomes and documents, their pages brittle with age and neglect. Yet, within their faded annals, a harrowing tale began to unfurl, a chronicle of depravity and suffering that would chill even the stoutest of hearts. Here, recorded in meticulous detail, were the brutal practices inflicted upon the hapless inmates of Poveglia's asylum. Barbaric treatments, born of ignorance and fear, stripped away the very humanity of those already tormented souls, reducing them to mere vessels for the twisted whims of their sadistic wardens. Jacob's hands trembled as he pored over the grim accounts, his mind reeling from the sheer depravity laid bare before him. Crude lobotomies, performed with rudimentary tools, and little regard for the agonies endured, left patients as hollow shells. Their once vibrant essence is sniffed out like candles scattering in the wind. Other passages spoke of restraints and deprivation, of inmates left to languish in squalid cells, their ravaged psyches assailed by the jeers and taunts of callous staff. The screams of the forsaken seemed to echo through the ages, searing themselves into Jacob's consciousness like brands of white-hot iron. Yet, even as revulsion churned in the pit of his stomach, he found himself unable to tear his gaze away from the damning evidence before him. For within these annals of torment, he sensed the restless spirits of Poveglia's damned, their anguished cries beckoning him to bear witness to the atrocities they had endured. And as the shadows lengthened, and the asylum's eerie ambience seemed to intensify around him, Jacob could not shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. Whispers, faint and indistinct, skittered along the edges of his perception, like the fevered mutterings of madmen lost to the depths of their own tormented psyches. A chill rippled down his spine as the realization took hold. The malevolent presence that had drawn him to this accursed place was awakening, stirred from its slumber by his intrusion into a realm where the veil between worlds grew perilously thin, and the reckoning it demanded would be one of unspeakable terror. the veil grows thin. As the shadows deepened within the asylum's forsaken halls, Jacob could no longer deny the unsettling truth that had begun to take root in the darkest recesses of his mind. The malevolent presence that had drawn him to this accursed place was awakening, stirred from its slumber by his intrusion into a realm where the boundaries between worlds grew perilously thin. At first, the signs were subtle, mere fleeting glimpses that skittered along the periphery of his vision, shadows that seemed to ride and contort in defiance of the laws of nature, whispers that skated along the edges of his consciousness like the fevered mutterings of tormented souls. Yet, with each passing moment, the phenomena intensified, as if the veil separating reality from the realm of the end were being inexorably rent asunder. Icy tendrils of dread coiled around Jacob's heart as he bore witness to manifestations that defied all rational explanation. Objects seemed to take on lives of their own, propelled by unseen forces that sent them clattering across the asylum's decrepit floors. Phantasmal figures flickered in the periphery of his vision, their twisted forms contorting in silent anguish before dissipating like wisps of acrid smoke. The air itself seemed to grow thick and oppressive, laden with a miasma of despair that clung to the back of his throat with each rattling breath. And amidst the eerie ambience, a discordant symphony began to swell, a cacophony of anguished cries and tortured wails that seemed to reverberate from the very walls themselves. Jacob's mind reeled, teetering on the precipice of madness as he struggled to comprehend the horrors unfolding around him. For in these manifestations, he could not deny the presence of the restless souls that had once called this nightmarish place their prison. The forsaken inmates of Poveglia's asylum, reaching out from beyond the grave to make their agonies known. Faces, twisted in masks of eternal torment, seemed to coalesce from the ether, their sunken eyes pouring into Jacob's very soul. Wordless pleas for mercy, for respite from the unending anguish they had endured, echoed through the shadows, driving icy lances of terror straight into his core. And as the veil between worlds grew ever more gossamer, Jacob found himself caught in the inexorable web of forces beyond his comprehension. The boundaries of his reality were unraveling, leaving him adrift in a waking nightmare from which there seemed no escape, a realm where the dead held sway, and the reckoning they demanded would be one of unspeakable horror. Whispers from the damned. Ensnared within the asylum's nightmarish embrace, Jacob found himself adrift in a waking dream, a realm where the boundaries between this world and the next had dissolved, leaving him at the mercy of forces beyond his comprehension. as the veil between realities thinned to a mere gossamer veil. The restless spirits of Poveglia stand pressed ever closer, their anguished cries echoing through the shadowed corridors like a discordant symphony of torment. Phantasmal forms coalesced from the ether, their twisted visages etched with the agonies they had endured in this place of nightmare and madness. Wordless pleas for respite, for deliverance from the unending torment that had been their existence, seemed to reverberate through Jacob's very being, driving icy land seas of terror into the core of his soul. Let, amidst the cacophony of suffering, individual voices began to emerge, fragmented whispers that carried the tales of those who had once called this accursed asylum their prison. Stories of depravity and cruelty, of lives shattered beyond repair by the barbaric treatments inflicted upon them. Jacob's mind reeled as he was assailed by the harrowing accounts, each more horrific than the last. He bore witness to the anguish of a young woman, her once vibrant spirit sniffed out by the brutal indignity of a crude mummy, leaving her a hollow husk, bereft of the spark that had once made her human. Another voice spoke of endless days spent shackled in squalid cells, the jeers and taunts of callous wardens echoing through the gloom as the inmate's psyche slowly unraveled, strand by tormented strand. And still, others recounted the agony of treatments that defied all bounds of decency, barbaric procedures that stripped away the very essence of your beings, leaving them as little more than vessels for the twisted whims of their tormentors. As each new tale unfurled, Jacob found himself inexorably drawn deeper into the asylum's nightmarish depths, the boundaries of his reality blurring until he could no longer discern where the tormented phantasms ended and his own fragile mind began. The weight of their suffering pressed down upon him, a suffocating miasma of despair that threatened to overwhelm his senses utterly. Yet, even as he teetered on a precipice of madness, a part of him understood that bearing witness to these atrocities was the only path to redemption, both for the end souls that lingered in this place, and for himself. For, in unveiling the asylum's darkest secrets, Jacob had opened a portal to a realm of horror from which there could be no turning back. The reckoning that the restless spirits demanded would be one that shattered the very foundations of his sanity, casting him into an abyss of eternal torment from which no escape was possible. Descent into the abyss. Enveloped within the asylum's nightmare realm, Jacob found himself adrift in a sea of anguished whispers, the tormented echoes of lives shattered by the depravities inflicted within these cost walls. As each new tale of suffering unfurled, he was drawn deeper into the vortex. The boundaries between reality and madness blurring until he could no longer discern where the phantasmal torments ended, and the fractured shards of his own psyche began. Yet, even as he teetered on a precipice of eternal damnation, a part of Jacob's mind understood that bearing witness to these atrocities was the only path to redemption, both for the restless souls that lingered in this place, and for himself. For, and unveiling the asylum's darkest secrets, he had opened a portal to a realm of horror from which there could be no turning back. The weight of their collective anguish pressed down upon him, a suffocating miasma of despair that threatened to overwhelm his senses utterly. Phantasmal forms materialized from the ether, their twisted visages contorted in masks of eternal torment, as they reached out with grasping claws, entreating him to share in their endless suffering. Icy tendrils of dread coiled around Jacob's heart, as he found himself inexorably drawn into the heart of the maelstrom, a nexus of malevolent energy that seemed to feed upon the anguish of the damned, growing in power with each soul it consumed. Here, amid the roiling chaos, a presence lurked, an entity born of the collective torment inflicted within the asylum's accursed walls, a force of pure, unadulterated evil that had festered like a cancer, feeding upon the agonies of the forsaken until it had taken on a sentience of its own. Jacob's mind reeled as the full weight of its malice washed over him, a psychic assault that threatened to shred the very fabric of his being. Visions of unspeakable horrors, atrocities that defied the boundaries of human depravity, assailed him in a relentless onslaught, a glimpse into the depravities that had given birth to this malignant entity. And as the air was rent by the anguished cries of the damned, Jacob understood the true nature of the reckoning they demanded. This malevolent force, this perverse manifestation of their collective suffering, had to be confronted, its unholy essence purged from the realm of the living, lest it continue to fester and grow, consuming all in its path. With a strength born of sheer desperation, Jacob steeled himself, drawing upon the last vestiges of his rapidly unraveling sanity as he prepared to do battle with the malignant entity. For in that moment, he knew that the fate of his very soul, and perhaps the souls of all those who had suffered within the asylum's walls, hung in the balance. Redemption's embrace. Engulfed by the maelstrom of anguished souls, and the malevolent entity that fed upon their torment, Jacob teetered on a precipice of oblivion. The boundaries of his reality had dissolved, leaving him adrift in a realm of nightmares, where the damned held sway, and the forces arrayed against him threatened to consume his very essence. Yet, even as the phantasmal claws of the malignant entity, or at the tattered remnants of his sanity, a flickering ember of defiance burned within Jacob's soul. For in that moment, He understood that the path to redemption, both for himself and for the tortured spirits that lingered in this place, lay in confronting the perverse manifestation of their collective suffering. Gathering the last vestiges of his rapidly unraveling psyche, Jacob steeled himself for the ultimate confrontation. He could feel the weight of the restless souls pressing in around him, their anguished whispers carrying a fragile hope, a desperate plea for deliverance from the endless torment they had endured. As the malevolent entity's essence swirled around him, Jacob called out to the damned, entreating them to lend him their strength. And in that moment, a profound shift occurred, like the parting of a veil that had long shrouded the truth from sight. The cacophony of tormented cries coalesced into a single, resonant chorus, their combined anguish focused like a burning lens upon the malignant force that had preyed upon them for so long. Jacob could feel their collective essence flowing into him, bolstering his rapidly flagging resolve and lending him the strength to confront the nightmare head-on. With a primal roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the asylum, Jacob unleashed the fury of the damned upon the malevolent entity. A maelstrom of psychic energy erupted forth, scouring the unholy presence with the collective anguish of centuries of suffering. The entity recoiled, its spectral form contorting in agony, as the purifying maelstrom laid waste to its corrupted essence. Jacob could feel the weight of the restless souls pressing in around him, their combined strength lending him the power to purge this place of the malignant force that had festered within its walls for far too long. As the entity's anguished wails echoed through the shadowed corridors, Jacob felt a profound sense of peace descending upon him. The veil between worlds was lifting, the boundaries of reality reasserting themselves as the malevolent presence dissipated like a nightmarish miasma. And in that moment of profound catharsis, Jacob understood the truth that had eluded him. The restless souls of Poveglia's damned had finally found the redemption they had so desperately sought. Their anguished cries had been heard, their torment made manifest, and in the crucible of their collective suffering, they had forged the means to purge the darkness that had consumed them for far too long. Echoes of the damned as the malevolent entity's anguished wails faded into the ether. Jacob found himself adrift in a profound silence, a stillness that seemed to envelop the asylum's crumbling walls like a shroud. The veil between worlds had lifted, the boundaries of reality reasserting themselves in the wake of the cathartic purging. Yet, even as the oppressive miasma of dread that had permeated this accursed place dissipated, Jacob could not shake the feeling that something lingered, a subtle resonance, like the fading echoes of a discordant symphony. gathering what little remained of his frayed psyche. He made his way through the shadowed corridors, each step carrying him closer to the outer world that had once seemed so distant, so far removed from the nightmares he had endured. As he emerged into the pale light of dawn, Jacob cast one final, haunted glance back at the asylum's crumbling facade. In that moment, he could almost discern the fleeting phantasms of the damned, the restless souls whose anguished cries had drawn him into the heart of this maelstrom of suffering. And though their tormented forms had dissipated, their presence seemed to linger, like a barely perceptible resonance that echoed through the very fabric of the place, a reminder, etched into the foundations of this accursed island, that the atrocities committed within the asylum's walls would never be truly forgotten. For in the crucible of their collective suffering, the restless souls of Poveglia's damned had forged a legacy, a haunting testament to the depths of human depravity and the resilience of the spirit in the face of unspeakable torment. As Jacob turned his gaze toward the distant horizon, he knew that the experience had left an indelible mark upon his very being. The boundaries of his perception had been shattered, the veil between worlds rendered gossamer thin, and the haunting echoes of the damned would forever reverberate through the chambers of his mind. The asylum's legacy would endure, a lingering specter that would cast its shadow over all who dared to tread upon Poveglia's accursed shores. A reminder that even in the darkest depths of despair, the human spirit has the power to confront the nightmare and emerge victorious, scarred perhaps, but forever changed by the ordeal. And so, as the sun rose over the Venetian lagoon, Jacob embarked upon his journey anew, carrying with him the indelible imprint of Poveglia's haunting legacy, a burden that would forever shape the course of his life, and the tales he would one day share with a world that could scarcely comprehend the horrors he had borne witness to. And so we reach the end of our haunting tale, dear listeners, a narrative woven from the threads of anguish and despair, where the restless souls of the damned cried out to make their torment known to the world beyond. Within the crumbling walls of Poveglia's asylum, an unspeakable evil festered, feeding upon the collective suffering of those forsaken souls until it had taken on a malevolent sentience of its own. That even when all hope seemed lost, when the veil between worlds grew perilously thin and the nightmare threatened to consume all in its path, the indomitable human spirit prevailed. Through the crucible of unspeakable torment, redemption's embrace was found. The agonies endured, the atrocities inflicted upon the inmates of that accursed place, will forever echo through the ages as a haunting legacy of the depths to which humanity can sink when shrouded in the darkness of ignorance and fear. But let this tale also serve as a testament to the resilience of the soul and its ability to overcome even the most horrific of circumstances. For it was the collective suffering of the damned that ultimately forged the means to purge the evil that had taken root within Poveglia's crumbling walls. As we part ways, I urge you all to carry the echoes of this tale with you. Let the restless whispers of the forsaken serve as a reminder that true darkness can only take hold when good souls choose the path of willful blindness. The horrors of Poveglia's asylum must never be forgotten, lest we allow such depravities to taint our world once more. Heed the anguished cries of the damned, and ensure that their sacrifice, their collective torment, was not in vain. Until we meet again, dear listeners, may the embrace of peaceful dreams find you, and may the echoes of the damned never cease their hunting vigil.